The Vatican doors did not close to keep enemies out that night. They closed to trap the witnesses inside. On October 30th, 1503, beneath the frescoed ceilings of the Apostolic Palace, the spiritual center of Christendom became the setting for one of the most infamous nights in Renaissance history. Cardinals stood in silence. Courtiers stared at the marble floor. And at the center of the spectacle sat Pope Alexander VI of the Borgia dynasty, smiling, as if the horror unfolding around him were entertainment. But the true nightmare was not the feast itself. It was what came after. At the heart of the story stood Lucrezia Borgia, daughter of the Pope, sister to Cesare Borgia, and one of the most feared women in Europe, not because of what she had done, but because of the family into which she had been born. Her life had already become a chain of political bargains sealed through marriage, betrayal, and bloodshed. By the age of 21, 2 husbands had already vanished from her life under circumstances so dark that Italy whispered her name with fear. Her first marriage had been discarded the moment it stopped benefiting the Borgia family. Her second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, was murdered after Cesare Borgia decided he had become politically inconvenient. Rome understood the message clearly. Being married to Lucrezia Borgia could become a death sentence. And yet, in 1503, another man was forced toward the altar. His name was Alfonso d'Este, heir to the Duchy of Ferrara. To the outside world, the union looked like a brilliant political alliance. Inside the courts of Italy, it felt more like an execution waiting to happen. Alfonso tried to avoid the marriage. Delays were proposed. Excuses were offered. Diplomatic channels strained to create distance between Ferrara and Rome. But Pope Alexander VI was not a man accustomed to refusal. Messengers arrived carrying the same warning again and again. Accept the marriage or face destruction. The Borgia family possessed armies, wealth, influence, and the terrifying ambition of Cesare Borgia, whose campaigns across Italy had already reduced entire cities to submission. Resistance meant risking annihilation. Ferrara yielded. As preparations began inside the Vatican, the atmosphere turned strange. Servants whispered about hidden meetings behind locked doors. Unfamiliar women were escorted through secret corridors late at night. Guards doubled their patrols. Cardinals exchanged nervous glances but asked no questions aloud. Even Johann Burchard, the Vatican's own master of ceremonies, sensed something deeply wrong unfolding beneath the polished surface of the celebration. He had witnessed corruption before. He had watched sacred offices sold like merchandise and seen papal politics descend into open decadence. But this felt different. This felt dangerous. Meanwhile, Lucrezia herself drifted through the preparations like a ghost already mourning her own future. Europe painted her as a seductress and poisoner, but those close to her described something else entirely: a woman exhausted by manipulation, trapped between a father and brother whose hunger for power eclipsed morality itself. The night before the wedding, unable to endure the suffocating tension any longer, Lucrezia reportedly retreated alone to pray inside the Sistine Chapel. Beneath painted saints and prophets, she begged silently for rescue. None came. On the morning of October 30th, the bells of St. Peter's rang across Rome as crowds gathered outside the Vatican to celebrate the marriage. Lucrezia appeared in a magnificent gown embroidered with gold thread, her pale face carefully powdered to hide the exhaustion beneath her eyes. The ceremony itself unfolded beneath sacred frescoes and candlelight. Pope Alexander VI personally officiated the union while rows of cardinals stood rigidly in attendance. Every gesture followed tradition. Every prayer sounded holy. But beneath the surface, dread spread through the hall, because everyone understood the Borgias, and everyone sensed the real event had not yet begun. After the ceremony, the guests were escorted into the lavish Borgia apartments where enormous banquet tables overflowed with roasted meats, exotic fruits, wine, and imported delicacies from across Italy. Music filled the air. Courtiers laughed nervously. Diplomats exchanged rehearsed compliments. At first, it resembled every extravagant Renaissance feast. Then the atmosphere changed. Alexander VI, flushed from wine, grew louder and more animated. Cesare Borgia rose silently and gave a small signal. The great doors of the hall slammed shut behind the guests. Guards stepped into position. No one was leaving. Moments later, side doors opened and 50 courtesans entered the chamber draped in silk and velvet, their faces tight with visible fear. A hush spread across the room. Then Pope Alexander VI announced the entertainment. One by one, the women were ordered to remove their clothing until they stood completely naked beneath the candlelight while cardinals, bishops, nobles, and ambassadors looked on in stunned silence. Some clergy lowered their eyes immediately. Others froze in disbelief. A few attempted to leave, only to notice the guards gripping the hilts of their swords near the exits. The message was clear. You will stay. You will witness this. Then came the command that would stain the night forever. Servants scattered chestnuts across the polished marble floor, while the Pope laughed openly from his elevated seat. The naked courtesans were ordered to crawl across the ground on all fours between the banquet tables, gathering the chestnuts like animals, while prizes of jewelry, silk, and gold were promised to the winners. The sound of rolling chestnuts echoed beneath sacred frescoes while princes of the church watched in horror. Johann Burchard later recorded the event in his diary, struggling even then to describe the degradation unfolding inside the Vatican itself. The so-called chestnut banquet would become one of the most infamous scandals in papal history. But even this was only the beginning. As midnight approached, Alexander VI announced that the marriage now had to be consummated publicly, so that no future challenge to its legitimacy could ever arise. The hall fell silent. Even Cesare Borgia reportedly appeared caught off guard by the extremity of the command.
Alfonso de Este stood frozen.
Lucrezia trembled beside him, unable to speak. Armed guards remained stationed around the room. Refusal was impossible. The couple were escorted into an adjoining chamber while witnesses remained gathered outside under direct orders from the Pope himself. What followed destroyed whatever dignity remained. Some guests reportedly prayed quietly. Others turned away in shame. Even the courtesans who had already endured their own humiliation lowered their eyes. By dawn, the Vatican apartments resembled the aftermath of moral collapse. Wine spilled across tables. Chestnuts lay crushed into the marble floor. Exhausted women huddled silently against the walls. Lucrezia herself seemed emotionally shattered beyond recognition. And when morning sunlight finally entered the palace windows, the story had already begun escaping into Rome. Whispers spread through taverns, churches, noble courts, and diplomatic circles. Ambassadors sent coded reports across Europe describing a scandal so grotesque that many struggled to believe it. The Borgia name, which had already inspired fear, now became synonymous with corruption itself. Years later, critics of the Church would invoke the Borgias as proof of the Vatican's decay. Among them was a German monk named Martin Luther, who pointed to papal corruption as evidence that the institution had lost its moral foundation. The scandal of the Borgias became one of many sparks feeding the growing fire that would eventually erupt into the Protestant Reformation. As for Lucrezia, she spent the rest of her life trying to escape the shadow of that night. In Ferrara she became a respected duchess, patron of the arts, protector of poets, and supporter of charitable works. Those who met her later in life described not a monster, but a woman carrying immense sorrow behind careful composure. She died at 39 after childbirth. Her reported final words were simple: "I am ready to be free." Alexander VI died not long after the scandal, surrounded by rumors that poison, the weapon so often associated with the Borgias, had finally reached him as well. Cesare Borgia lost his power soon after and died violently in Spain, his body abandoned far from Rome. But the memory of that night survived them all. Centuries later, Johann Burchard's diary resurfaced, dragging the chestnut banquet back into historical debate and public fascination. Historians still argue over how much was exaggerated by enemies of the Borgias and how much truly happened exactly as described. Yet regardless of embellishment, the story endured because it symbolized something larger than one family. It became a warning about what happens when power no longer fears judgment. Because some of history's darkest acts are not committed in shadows. They happen beneath sacred ceilings while everyone watches in silence.